Well, good afternoon, sisters and brothers, and welcome to this October 13th, checking the date, edition of Smart Church at Noon. Thank God, as always, for everybody that is tuning in. I certainly appreciate everybody that is already in the chat box communicating with one another because that is how we roll. Good afternoon to every last one of you. I always think about how it is that our elders taught us that when you go in a room, you speak to the people that are already in the room. Don't act like you don't have any home training. And I see that that has even transferred over to this virtual world and how we come in the room saying hello. There's no sense in not communicating with one another, interacting with one another. And so, again, thank all of you. Want to remind you that as a community, communities share information with one another. And so if you know of anything that's happening in the community around us that we need to know about, please don't hold it to yourself. Please put it in the chat box so that we can govern ourselves according to the information that you provide to us. Don't ever forget that information is power. And the more that we share with one another, the more power we have as a people and not just as individuals, as this world tries to teach us. Speaking of information and power, do us a favor. And if you haven't already, share this broadcast with other people in whatever manner you think is correct. Maybe you need to do it manually and yell at somebody or touch somebody and let them know they need to tune in to what we are doing. Or perhaps you need to reach out virtually, hit that share button, hit that like button. And if you are not on, no, if you are on YouTube and have not already, hit that bell. That bell means that you are subscribing to our YouTube channel. And the more subscribers we have, it changes the algorithm such that our broadcast are moved into different people's timelines so that they can see what we are doing. That's the reason we want to spread the knowledge that we engage every Wednesday, twice a day. And so it is, sisters and brothers, that this is Smart Church. And in Smart Church, we come together to conversate about, to talk about God through the study of his word, because we just believe that if we are smarter as it relates to the word of God, then we can live better and live more like him. And that's what it is all about. So again, we appreciate every one of you. We don't ever want to get started without giving a shout out to those of you who are watching this in the rebroadcast. Thank God for you, that even though your schedule did not allow you to watch us during the noon hour, you took the time to go back and see what we are doing. And so again, thank all of you for being a part. And I know that our time is limited, especially in the middle of the day. And so let's get to the study. I wanted to talk today about maintaining self-confidence, a healthy self-identity, if you will, in a world that is structured to really make us doubt ourselves and doubt our identity, our value, and our worth. And to do so, I'd ask you to join me in the book of Job. Job in the Old Testament, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 is what we will read. The book of Job, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Job is right before the book of Psalms in our sacred scriptures that we call the Bible. Psalms is the very center of the book. Just before that is the book of Job, and that's where we will begin our conversation today. In the book of Job, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 is our jumping point, if you will. Thank you, Sister Beatrice, for Sister Nancy, for putting it there. For those who will catch the broadcast at a later time, the book of Job, chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. I am reading, of course, from the New International Version. Check this out. It's kind of funny when you're listening to it, or humorous. Then Job replied. Job is replying to his friends. Doubtless, you are the only people who matter. and wisdom will die with you. But I have a mind as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know all these things? That's the reading of the word. That's it. So let's talk about it. And so we're talking about maintaining our self-confidence, a healthy view of ourselves in a world that is constantly trying to make us doubt ourselves and our value and our worth. There's a sister named Bell Hooks. Some of you have probably heard of her. She was very popular 60s and 70s and perhaps even early 80s feminist or womanist writer, author, teacher. Bell Hooks, look her up, just as it's spelled, Bellhooks. She had something to say about people who don't have a healthy view of themselves. I'd like you to just jot them down as a guide for as we talk today. Bell Hooks said, people who are ashamed of themselves and of their true identity are more interested in talking about things that are wrong, talking about self-hatred. These are the people who value what they think is better than they are more than their own uniqueness. These are people who more than likely are more interested in blending in or assimilating uh, into the culture rather than standing out. I'll say that for you again. Three things she kind of said. One, they're more interested in talking about self-hatred. They seem to concentrate on more on people that they deem are so-called better than them, and they just want to blend in. They want to assimilate into the culture around them rather than celebrating their uniqueness. Now, I know that's not you, but if you really think about it, uh, uh, there are too many, right, who call themselves one, believers, Christians, disciples of Christ, and then those whose skin has been kissed by the African sun, who kind of fall into those descriptions, right? And we hear it. You've heard me say this before, and you've heard it. These are the people who are always talking about how much better uh, uh, you have it than they do. We used to use, I don't know what they say in today's terms, but you used to hear this language in they'd see you blessed or see you prospering or moving forward, and they'd call your stuff little. I see you got your little job or your little car, or they say things like, well, if everybody's not able to live like you are, or guys used to say things to one another. We'd shake one another's hands and say stuff like, boy, if I had your hand, I'd throw mine away. All of that kind of foolishness. These are people who are really not happy with themselves, and in some sense, right, in some sense, or ashamed and don't value themselves as they should. And so as we walk through today, I want you to keep those little things in mind, right? And in the end, I think you'll be able to have answers uh, uh, to those kind of queries, if you will, so that we can help people, especially help our people that we don't think that way about ourselves. Because believe me, it's larger than that, right? I would venture to say that the reason it seems so easy to kill Black people in this day and age all across our country, I dare say even across the globe, the reason it's so easy is because we don't value ourselves, and so it's easy to kill the ones who look like us, right? Or for our young people to say things like they don't expect to live past the age of 19, right? Or to shortchange or shortcut ourselves from living up to our full potential. And so I want to share with you so that you can help your children, grandchildren, the generations behind us, even our contemporary generation, so that we value ourselves more. So let's look at Job and his friends and their situation, right? First thing is, so Job has three friends. You know Job's story, right? He's in a bad predicament. He was on top. Everything was going well. God had a conversation with evil, with devil, with Satan, and Satan says to God, the only reason why Job is so committed to you is because you protect him, right? And God essentially gives evil permission to try Job, and the devil, Satan, evil just goes all in, right? And takes everything, every material thing, and every familiar family, every familiar thing that Job has, and then it makes Job sick, right? And so Job is suffering psychologically. He's going through trauma. He's suffering physically. Perhaps when you read closely in Job's argument with and against God, Job is even suffering spiritually. And so his friends come to him, his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, right? They come to him, and according to the customs and of their day, the culture of their day, the theology of their day, they say to Job, you must have did something wrong. And so there's this back and forth for most of the book of Job between Job and his friends. So your first subsection, if those of you, you know how we roll, right? You keep your scriptures open, but we also have some sort of note-taking apparatus so we can go back and check. Under your first subsection, you should write, God is unpredictable. God is unpredictable. Let's see what's happening here in this exchange between Job and his friends is they think that they know what God is going to do. I'll say that for you again. Job and his friends think that they can predict what God is going to do, and they are really operating from this kind of narrow stream I'm doing that like blinders, this kind of narrow stream of a faith tradition that says if you do everything right, if you live this kind of stringent, according to these stringent policies, if you don't take any risk, then God will bless you. But if you veer from any this kind of strict rules and policies, then God will curse you, or God will allow things to happen to you. Have you ever dealt with people who try to convince you of similar things, right? That they understand and know that you're going through some situations, and either they come out directly or they indirectly hint at, well, you must be suffering from something that you did wrong. And those of you who have walked with God for a moment or two, you already know and recognize, right, that sometimes life just happens to you. You can be doing everything, right? And sometimes that's even the argument that we have with God. I'm doing everything I know to do on your behalf, and you still let this happen to me, right? And so that cannot possibly be the case. But Job and his friends live in a culture where the people think that they can predict what God is going to do based on human behavior. I'm going to say that for you again so you can hear how silly that sounds. The people think that they can predict and in a sense manipulate, right? Because if I do everything right, then you're supposed to bless me. Predict and manipulate what God is going to do based upon human behavior. But scripture, our sacred scriptures do not teach us that. For those of you who are taking notes, you will want to remember and write Matthew chapter 4, verse 45. That scripture says that God makes the sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust, right? And so what God does and how God operates cannot possibly be predicted by what humans do. Here's another one. Um, Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 through 9. Isaiah 55, 8 through 9, where God says through the prophet, my ways are not your ways, right? In fact, he says that my ways are higher than your ways and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. In other words, we cannot restrict God to the way we see things. Oh, that's good. We cannot restrict God to the way we see things, which would suggest, going back to the point that I just made, right? That we cannot possibly predict God or manipulate God into doing or not doing based upon the way we view the world, our activity, or our thoughts. Now, granted, as you've heard me say before, and please don't ever forget, God will respond and God does reward our faithfulness, right? Scripture bears that out. Our life's experiences bear that out. But all of us also have testimonies when we know we were not right and God blessed us or took care of us anyway, right? And then there has also been seasons, if you will, when we were really in tune and yet there are prayers that have gone unanswered. You cannot predict God. You can't manipulate God. And so here's why that's important for us as believers, the church, universal, overall, and for us as individuals. We have to be careful as we are moving out of probably the worst global experience of our lifetimes, and I'm talking about the pandemic that probably could have been avoided. As we are moving out individually in our families, communities, faith communities, as a collective and as individuals, we have to be careful that we don't restrict God to what we already know. Let me say that for you again. As we are moving out, we've gotten our vaccines. Many of you are taking the boosters now. We are much more aware of our surroundings and what's happening around us. We're taking precautions. We see some elements of moving forward now. And I'm not talking about what the politicians and the business persons say. I'm talking about you and your discernment, what you see God doing, right? We have to be careful that we don't restrict God to what we already know. It is under these kinds of conditions, when you read your scriptures, and it's in the book of Isaiah, it's under these kinds of conditions that we hear the voice of the Lord saying, forget the former things, behold, I'm doing a new thing. And I just believe, sisters and brothers, that we will experience God in this particular time, in this particular season. If we allow, we will experience God in ways that eyes have not seen and ears have not heard, neither have entered into the heart of man, right? That's scripture. But we have to be willing. We have to be willing. And so we can't restrict God. We can't predict God, and we definitely cannot manipulate God. By the way, let me stick a pin here. This is not a part of the lesson, but I did mean to ask you. Those of you who had a chance to watch the broadcast from this past weekend, there was a section there where I talked about moving forward. I would certainly like to hear your responses to that. But if you would just get at me, not in this forum, but in different forums, email, text message, and so forth. If you need to go back, then definitely do so. Watch it again, because we're trying to hear God. I am trying to hear God. We're discussing with the leadership of the churches. Dr. Domain is trying to hear God as we're talking about moving New Canaan and Elm Grove forward according to the will, the way, and the word of God. And so I'd like to hear from you, if you will. And I guess I can speak for Doc as well, that we would like to hear from you about what you heard and your response to it. And so please, if you take the time, thank you so very much. Now let's get back to the lesson. So last thing we said, can't manipulate, can't predict God, right? We've got to be willing to go with God, flow with God according to his will and his way. So the next point I'd like to bring up to you is that what Job is faced with, and necessarily so what we are faced with in our daily lives, is this notion of going contrary to the culture and maintaining our dignity. So if you're taking notes, you can just, your subsection can just be dignity. Dignity, right? Going contrary to the notes. I'm sorry, going contrary to culture that said you must have did something wrong, Job. If you didn't, stand on one leg, jump 3 times, spit in a certain direction, say this number of prayer, all of that kind of stuff we do to ourselves and to one another, then God must be punishing you. You got to be willing to go against that kind of foolishness, ignorance, if you will, and maintain your sense of dignity with your saved self. Now, 2 persons you've heard me mention quite often, both Cornel West, contemporary philosopher, right, public philosopher, and Jürgen Moltmann. You've heard that name. Jürgen Moltmann is a 20th century German theologian. Both of them say that this idea of dignity is inextricably tied to hope, right? Remember, Jürgen Moltmann is the guy that came up with the theology of hope that you've heard me mention so often. So both West and Moltmann tell us that maintaining your dignity, particularly when you are going through, right? And when you're going through is public. Have you ever been there before, where your issue is on display? People don't have to guess about it, right? Or if you like Paul, right? Remember when Paul went through the storm and the shipwreck, and they made it to the island on broken pieces of the ship, and Paul gets there. They collect wood, and Paul is warming his hand on the fire, and out of the fire jumps a snake, and it bites Paul. And the people from the island say, he must be a murderer. He must, same kind of theology and the theological structure, right? He must have did something wrong, that the snake is biting him, and now his past is catching up to him, right? And they said he must be a murderer. And the issue for Paul is that they weren't lying, right? So what do you do when people are talking about you publicly and they telling the truth about you, right? Your issue is on display. And so what both West and Moltmann put forth or assert for us is that maintaining your dignity in that kind of situation is tied to your hope. In other words, you are saying to yourself that I can go through this because I know it's going to get better. I need to say that for you again. Maintaining dignity when your struggle is on display, and even when it is not, right? Maintaining who you are and walking in the room with your head high and doing those things that you know need to happen in spite of what may be lack, right? And the sacrificing to make it through difficult times and all of that kind of stuff. All of that making it through those kinds of seasons in your life, it depends on, you maintaining your dignity, and maintaining your dignity is tied to you understanding that whatever it is, you're going to make it through it. It's going to be better. And so you minister to yourself by saying, I can handle this rough time because I know better times are ahead. Maybe that's all somebody needed to hear at the noon hour today. I can handle this situation because I know better times are ahead. And believe me when I tell you that when God calls you to minister to others, to teach others, right, about maintaining dignity in the midst of troubled times, right, of not losing it all, of not dismissing oneself from sanity and all that can happen when the pressure seems to become too much. Sometimes it is a matter of using a historical context. I've seen God do this before, but then speaking of hope and saying, listen, this is not your end. You can make it, and you will make it through this time, no matter how hard it is, because God has something better for you. This low point is not your end. And for us who are Christians, all of that is predicated on our firm belief in the empty tomb, right? It is the empty tomb that teaches us the real meaning of hope. And in all the ways that you've heard it described, in all of the sermons and in all of the lessons that you've heard before, it is true. If you believe that God can raise a dead man to life, then certainly God can handle your situation, can handle our situations. That's what gives us hope. We know the tomb is empty. And if God works in that manner, then surely God works in our lives as well. And so when we maintain our dignity, even though we may be going through, right, our dignity that is tied to our hope, then it lets us know, even though we may be at low points in our lives, there are certain things that we will accept and certain things that we will not. And here it is, as we see in the attitude of Job, I'm not going to let you come over here and talk down on me when I'm already, at a low point in my life. Did you recognize that in Job's language? Job said in this little phrase that is contemporary that I kind of like, see, what we not finna do is, you're not going to come over here and make me feel worse than I already feel. You know what I'm saying? Anybody's ever, experienced that kind of thing? Where it is that, I'm already feeling bad and here you go, right? With all of your negative talk and about what I should have done and what what they would not have done it. And what I've discovered is it's easy for people to talk about what you should do with your life when they are not in your shoes. Check that out, right? It's easy to talk about for people to talk about what you should do with your situation when they're not trying to walk in your shoes. They don't know the history of the situation. They don't know the conversations that you and God are having, right? They don't know where you're trying to go. All they know is they have an opinion. So Job essentially says to his friend, Job essentially says to his friends, you're not coming over here talking. I'm glad you know everything, but I am not inferior to you, is essentially what he says to them. So let's check out Job and his condition. Are we still together? Is this helping anybody? Job and his condition. Check him out. So remember that when we hear Job, even in chapter 12, when we hear Job, he's speaking from a place of both loss and pain, right? Job is going through some things and his friends come along and they are no help. Remember, is Job, who had to bury all of his children at one time. Think about that. Job had to have funerals for all of his children at one time. And his boo, his wife, the one who's supposed to be down with him, but turned out she down to get him. That's the ghetto boys, right? She comes to him talking about, you ought to just curse God and die. Imagine that, right? Somebody come to you and say, I wish you were dead, right? Job has lost all of his fortune, and Job has lost his standing and his status in the community. But Job maintained his dignity. Did you hear that? But Job maintained his dignity, right? In fact, what you hear Job declare in verse 3 of our text is, just like you have understanding, I have understanding too. And I'm not inferior, or I am not less than you are, right? And the very reason, I want you to get this, the very reason that Job could talk that way is because God, or perhaps it is that God taught Job that the stuff did not make Job. I know that's elementary, but maybe you ought to write it down anyway so you can teach somebody else. Perhaps it is what Job learned in this, and the reason he can talk like that is because God taught him that the stuff did not make Job. In fact, what Job learned, and I hope that you understand or will understand, is that the stuff does not contribute nor diminish your value or your worth in any way, shape, or form. Now, that is directly contradictory to the measurements and the paradigms that our worldly systems use, right? We are measured by how shiny, how new, how great our stuff is, whether or not we have the latest and the greatest. As H. Beecher Hicks would say, the numbers in our bank accounts and the letters behind our name, in front of or behind our name, all of that stuff. But to maintain a healthy sense of both meekness and dignity, right? To understand your value and your worth, then you must understand that none of that stuff can add or take away from who you are for real. I want you to get that down. None of that stuff. Now, I'm not talking against having nice things. I'm not talking against having funds for the future and all of that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying with or without it, you are who you are, especially in the sight of God. Did you hear that? Especially in the sight of God. One of the things that I've been thinking about all morning long, and I'll go and write about it between sometimes either between lessons today or late tonight, is we are so busy trying to build up individuals with stuff that we forget the power of institutions in our communities and the very base institution of family, right? Sometimes we're so busy to make sure our children have the stuff that we don't teach them morals and ethics and proper behavior and a proper view of themselves. And so please get that down, man, because you're definitely gonna need that to teach somebody else, right? That the stuff does not add or take away from who you are. So if you want some scripture, and I won't read them for you, but I'll give them to you to write, and you go back and read them in your private study time. What contributes contributes to what I just said? Psalms 139, 13 and 14. You want to write that one and check it out? Psalms 139, 13 and 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 16 and 17. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 16 and 17. And then Psalms 118, 21 through 23. Psalms 118, 21 through 23. I'll go through them again to make sure you have them. Psalms 139, 13 and 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 16 and 17. And then Psalms 118, verses 21 through 23. So I'll close with this. Excuse me. I'll close with this. I love that Job reminds his friends, you don't know everything. You especially don't know everything about me. And then he says, I am not inferior to you. I am not inferior to you. This is my third time mentioning that, right? And so I wondered, what could give Job this kind of confidence, this kind of hope, if you will, after everything that he'd gone through? I don't even want to try to imagine what the brother was dealing with, but I do want to know what gave him the impetus to say, this is not the end for me. Even though at some point it gets so low, Job says, man, I regret the day I was even born. But as you read the book, his confidence begins to build. I would assess to you, one, that Job was unafraid to take a critical assessment of his own life. I'll say that again. Job was unafraid to take a critical assessment of his own life. That's good to remember, right? And it's not so much that I do something wrong that God punish me, but hey, is my lifestyle contributing to the things, right, that I'm going through? Was I not careful enough about my children? Did I not take care of myself properly so that I could remain physically healthy? Did I not pay enough attention to my wife and the situation and our marriage and so forth? Because maybe it's not that I'm sick. Maybe she's been wanting to tell me this for a long time, and I'm just realizing it. I bring the matter to your attention, right? Because quite frankly, some of the things that we go to are the exact result of choices that we have made, right? Sometimes we don't just become physically sick because that's our lot in life. There are times when we contributed through eating habits or the lack of exercise, or we are ignorant because of our lack of even trying to gain more knowledge, or we see behavior, because certain behavior in the people around us, because we allow it, right? We let a joke here slip, and we let another thing slide. Next thing you know, they think you like it when they try to abuse you and misuse you. What am I doing? What could I have done, or am I doing to contribute? Now, if you can check the boxes and say I'm good, then more power to you. I'm glad, right? But sometimes we have to check ourselves to make sure I'm not contributing. I am not contributing to my situation. Here's the other thing, and the last thing. Job could probably talk like this because Job had a history with God. Remember, it was Job in the beginnings, in the conversation between God and evil, that God says, have you tried my servant Job yet? So God had invested in Job, and God knew enough about Job, and God had so much confidence in Job that he knew that Job may slip, but he would withstand whatever evil brought his way. Now, bring that matter to your attention, because historically, right, you wonder how we as Christians, and we as believers, and we as believers whose skin has been kissed by the African sun in this that they call the Americas, right? How in the world do we make it? How do we maintain? How do we keep it going with all of that, and I don't need to go through the list, right? But it is because we have a history with God. And it did not start on these shores right? When we got here and they tried to teach us Christianity, we already knew God, right? We knew God way back in Kemet, right? That first there was Nubia, then there was Kemet. First ideas about God. We knew way back then. The names may be different, right? And details about who he is and how he operates may be different, but we knew him. We knew him as Amun Ra, right? Back in Kemet or Egypt. We knew him as Aludamare, that's the Yoruba. We knew him as Gianyame, that's the Akan. We knew him as Malunga, right? That's the Bantu. And we brought that to the Americas. Not only so, but we brought means of survival and skills. And so that's how we maintain our confidence. If you are going through now, as we go through as a world community, right? People wonder, how does he keep his head up? How does he maintain his dignity? I know his business, and yet he keeps showing. Is because one, right? You are unafraid to critically assess yourself, but then two, you already have a history with God. You know the power of his presence in your life, right? You already know what he can do. And so since I have a history with God, I can maintain my hope. I can maintain my dignity. I know that this place is not the end for me. Quite often, what we do, especially we preachers, we like to talk about the resume of God, right? And we go through the list. God put the sweet in the sugar, right? And God kept Daniel in the lion's den, and all that God has done. God raised Jesus from the dead, and God brought Paul through. So all of that is wonderful. But I would suggest to you that you maintain your own resume and update your own resume, not your vocation or your career resume as it relates to the systems of this world, but your resume with God, right? And how you and God have interacted over the years since you were saved for real, for real. And I think if you just sat down and start writing about it, you'd be surprised of what you and the Lord have accomplished over these years. And then I would suggest to you that as you go through that exercise, that and as you and God are talking, God will begin to reveal to you, this is not all. These are the things that I have in the future, what we are working towards. Here is the vision for your life, for your family's life, for your loved one's life. Listen, I thank God for you. Thank you so much for being a part of this lesson, for listening, for studying with us. That's Job chapter 12. Go back and read it. Very powerful message for us. I want to share with you our announcements for the day, and then we'll be on our way. This coming Saturday from 8 o'clock to noon, the Greenwell Springs and Eden Park extension, the Greenwell Springs Extension and Eden Park neighborhood group will host a community cleanup. It will begin at the Star Hill Church and work their way back towards the Eden Park area. Those of you who live in that area or just want to come out and help, our own sister Ella Morgan is an integral part of the leadership in this effort and in that Greenwell Springs Eden Park group. And so you can contact Sister Morgan if you need more information. But it's as I understand it, it's a good old-fashioned let's clean up our own community effort. That's this coming Saturday from 8 a.m. To noon, starting at the Star Hill Church. Funeral announcements. Our own brother Thomas Roach has transitioned and now sits with the great cloud of witnesses. His funeral arrangements are incomplete. Sister Monica Knox, who is the daughter of Joyce Burchell, our own Joyce Burchell. Her service is next Friday, the 22nd at 11 a.m. at D-Cell's Funeral Home. Other announcements. You can come by and pick up your elements for this weekend's Lord's Supper virtual celebration, come by Elm Grove on the Zion Street side from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. There'll be some other things, other packages that will be given out at that time. On this coming Sunday, as we are in the midst of our 96th church anniversary, I'll ask you to make a special effort among those that you trust in your life and in your home as we celebrate the Lord's Supper together on this coming Sunday. And then after worship, if you can have a community meal with your loved ones, those that you trust, because we can't trust everybody in this day and age, but those that you trust, and have a conversation about your family as much as you know about where you've come from. Just let's be willing to share with one another in a community meal, if you will, this coming Sunday among your family, your loved ones, those that you trust after our worship experience. Sisters, don't forget that on Tuesday, October 19th, Dr. Johnson Peters, that's our own, will gather with you via Zoom. That information will come out soon to discuss Black women and heart disease. If you think it's not an issue, you're wrong. You really want to be in on that conversation and to gather that information. And then on Sunday, October 24th, we will celebrate cancer survivors and our ancestors who died of cancer. They're asking you to send in pictures of those persons, both the survivors and those who died of cancer. Send it to information@elmgrovebc.org by this coming Friday. Lastly, this is our anniversary month. We're celebrating. I hope that you're enjoying the virtual experience. Don't forget that as is our tradition, we ask that you give $96 above and beyond your normal tithes and offerings during this month. If you can, if the Lord blessed you to do so. If he has not, if you just can't do it right now, then put 5 on it. And I don't mean 5 literally. I mean do what you can. God bless all of you. Listen, go forward with dignity, go forward with hope, go forward to love and serve the Lord. Peace.